Hello, and welcome to the official beginning of another season of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are covering the Umbrella Academy, Volume 1 Apocalypse Suite.
I guess it does count as Volume 1. I don't think they're... You have the trades in front of you. Mine
has a 1 on the spine.
Okay, they do have a 1. Okay,
from the box. From the I don't think they I think that was a convention of putting them in the slipcase.
In the slipcase. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Just to say, this is the reading order.
Yeah, I had them in single issue, and I also had them digitally, and I reread them digitally, so I don't see what the spine looks like. So yeah, it is Volume 1, but it is subtitled Apocalypse Suite, even though I believe when they were coming out, the single issues do just say Umbrella Academy. But when you flip through them on the title page, it says part 1 of 6 of the Apocalypse Suite. So they had the subtitle there. It just wasn't on the cover. And then for Dallas and Hotel Oblivion, volumes 2 and 3, they actually have the subtitles on the cover of the single issues. But yeah, Volume 1, the Apocalypse Suite, 6 issues from September 2007 to February 2008. Volume 1 also includes the Free Comic Book Day issue, which came out in May 2007 before issue 1 dropped. That's in the back of the first trade. It's the story about when the Umbrella Academy come across a murder victim who is Allison, aka the Rumor, aka number 3, and they deal with the magicians, the supervillain, the magicians. That short story is in the Free Comic Book Day issue. So that was your tease leading into issue 1. And yeah, I guess before we get into what we want to talk about, I guess I will mention that, we whenever we can, we have mentioned that some of the books we've covered, have been honored at the Eisners, which again are the Oscars of the comic industry. And in 2008, the Umbrella Academy Apocalypse Suite, this volume did win the Eisner for Best Limited Series, which I guess it still qualifies as limited series, even though it is ongoing. But I guess the fact that they do these arcs.
But see, that's the Dark Horse cheat.
Yeah, exactly. Each one of these Apocalypse Suite, Dallas, Hotel Oblivion, these are all individual limited series versus an ongoing series. It's kind of what HBO used to do with their quote unquote ongoing shows, like White Lotus. I think if you watch White Lotus on HBO,
I don't. If they come up with that a little sooner, Prentice could have beaten the West Wing once in a while.
Well, but that was the thing though, that White Lotus season 1 won for best limited series or miniseries, something like that. And then it was announced season 2 came out, and the thought is, well, how can you have season 2 if the thing you aired was a miniseries? And now I think it's in continuing series, but that was kind of that same kind of cheat by making these separate installments. You can have some category fraud. They're not saying that's what Dark Horse did intentionally, but yeah, their business model allows for, at least the publication of this comic allows for each one of these story arcs essentially to be its own limited series. So this one, 2008, was a winner, and I think well deserved. I did not go back and see who they beat out in 2008, but I think the Apocalypse. I think this first one is the strongest of the 3, and so I think it's well deserved.
I mean, the most recent example I'm thinking of is Twig was listed as a limited 5-issue series, and I believe was submitted for awards that way, because they submitted it before the last issue was out, and it became so popular that at the end of the last issue says Twig will return, and I'm like, that's not what a limited series should mean. But again, I understand that Twig story is complete.
Oh, that's saying
when it's back in the Twigverse or something.
If it does return and it's Twig : something else number 1, then yes, it is a limited series.
Which it will be a number 1 with 80 more variants.
I'm sure it will. It will not be. I think Twig was 6 issues. It won't be, the number won't continue. It will be a brand new series, and that's how the industry works. For good or for ill, those kind of things work because people see number 1 and that's what sells. So,
okay. Wait, I have a fun fact because I did look up the 2008 nominees for limited series.
Excellent, hit me with them.
So they competed against Atomic Robo by Brian Clevenger and Scott Wagender. That's on Red 5 Comics. Never even heard of it.
I've heard of
that. Competed against, and okay, now here's another category cheat. Dark Tower, The Gunslinger Born by Peter David, Robin Firth, and I'm like, okay, well, I understand that was like a limited 12 issue thing. I've seen those Gunslinger
the
Dark Tower
Towers.
things.
Yeah, sure.
But that's based on an 8-book series from Stephen King.
Yeah.
That's
And
being adapted to an even bigger
each one
thing.
of those. Yeah, and I think they're doing something similar with that. I don't know if they've been nominated, but various books in the Frank Herbert Dune universe are being adapted that way. Some of them are original stories. I think some maybe from notes he had, but it's the same kind of thing where each one of them is Dune : something, and they're all 6, 12 issue miniseries, whatever it are. So yeah,
and it did not take shows like Stranger Things long to follow suit. I think within 6 months of the show dropping, there was a comic. So then we had Nightly News by Hickman, which we mentioned that on that episode. Parade with Fireworks by Michael Cavallaro. That's Shadowline Image, and that was it. And then it was Umbrella Academy. So it's like in terms of like hindsight here, the most enduring easily was Umbrella Academy, probably because of the show.
I think so, but also, it also had, multiple follow-ups. So I think Atomic Robo did as well, but it's not nearly, it's Red 5 Publishing, I believe you said. That's what it is. It's not a major publisher. And Nightly News, again, that's more important in a historical context in terms of this being the first thing that Jonathan Hickman put out. So when you look back on his career, that's an important milestone. But definitely as a title, Umbrella Academy had the longest legs. So I guess if you were to go back and, if you are judging the Eisners in terms of, well, did they quote unquote get it right? You probably feel that they did.
I would have to say on that one for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely.
By the way, if you Google Parade with Fireworks by Mike Cavallaro, I think you would recognize the cover.
Okay.
I did but anyway, we're not here to talk about the losers of 2008. We already did that. We're here to talk about the winner of 2008. And you want to talk a little bit about the production, but I do want to pick up the 2 pins that we put in the Zero episode.
Yeah.
To dive straight into those as soon as we get into the book itself.
Yeah.
What do you have on the production?
Well, I guess we kind of covered a little bit of that there. Just the idea that this was this was a book that had, as it went on, it had delays. Not even counting for the fact that there was almost a 10-year gap between volumes 2 and 3. But this book initially came out pretty much on time. Those first 6 issues came out in 6 straight months. So following a Free Comic Book Day. So at the time, it really was you felt like, I think if you got on this train early, you felt like you were going to be on it. It was going to keep going. And then there were some stalls along the way. So I think that's why, to me, this is the strongest volume of the series. I think it feels probably the most cohesive story-wise. And I don't know if that's because this is the one book that came out on time. I mean, it's possible that they had all this stuff done before it was even published. As opposed to try to get things out on deadline. So again, I don't know if that's the case, but I think it is worth noting as we go through. It will be worth noting as we go through volumes 2 and 3, seeing how when the issues were actually finished, published, and released, how that maybe either affected the storytelling or potentially at least my reading of the story. Because again, these are books that I read, as they were coming out. So I think because of that, volume 1 is the strongest for me.
Yeah. I have full disclosure. I'm back in the situation that it's all too familiar in this podcast. I've only read volume 1 so far. We did our big deep dive into the unwritten. Then Alex and I took a couple weeks off because we were so far ahead of schedule, and I caught up on a lot of other reading that I had to do. It had been months since I touched Batman. I'm now current on Zdarsky's Batman. Got myself all the way current with Zdarsky's Daredevil. There were 2 manga series I was reading that I finished. I'm in the middle of a Neil Stevenson tome that I still haven't finished. And there were a couple other comic and non-comic things I finished. So anyway, I tore out a lot of stuff, but the Umbrella Academy only did 1. Although it is funny how often I'm reading things that parallel each other, and I think that's kind of why like my ADHD brain likes that kind of multitasking. because right now the manga series that I'm going through is called Assassination Classroom, which is training a bunch of kids to be assassins. And it's like a twisted experiment from some guy who thinks he knows better type thing. And it's like, oh yeah, there are prevalent themes between Western and non-Western comics.
Yeah. On that note, I mentioned it last week. You should maybe pick up Deadly Class by Rick Mender and Wes Craig. That's literally about a school for assassins.
I think I have the first volume and I really, really loved it.
Yeah.
And I think I picked it up in trade when the whole thing was coming out in single issue, and I did my classic, I'll just support it and trade later.
Yeah. But no, if the idea of having those similar themes across different books and different things you're consuming, it'd be a good fit for that. But no, I think there are connections, although, the Umbrella Academy not specifically being trained as assassins, but one could argue they were being trained and groomed to at least be weapons. In terms of, being adopted as children and harnessing these powers. So maybe not assassins per se, but definitely weapons. And whenever you have children developing powers and you have them, you unleash them upon the world to do good or do ill, that's fertile ground for storytelling, specifically comic book storytelling. Comic books love that stuff all the time. They, those parallels are all over the place, which is one of the reasons why I find this book enjoyable.
Yeah. All right. So you want to jump in with our pins first? Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So pin number 1, we talked about how we were dismissive of Way.
Yeah.
And there are 2 different interpretations to read some of these things. So some of the quirkiness, like this is the last page of issue 1, and it says, it's not a narration box, it's just a little note. It says, "This is the end of the first part of the Umbrella Academy adventure, Apocalypse Suite. There are 5 more chapters to these series with 22 pages per chapter, totaling 132 pages. There are 7 members of the Umbrella Academy, 72 names on the Eiffel Tower. There is no connection between these numbers."
Yeah.
I really love it, but I was like, is he just like, is he like Letoing? Is like, I hate using it that way, but is he like being Jared Leto weird for the sake of weird?
Yeah. There is a way to read that where, and maybe it's the only way to read it, I don't know, but there's a way to read that where it comes off totally pretentious, where you understand that the person writing this thinks they are really, really clever,
right? Which is what I did the first time.
Yeah. And you don't know if it's doing that, or is the writer just trying to be funny? Is it just being nonsensical to be funny, to put it in there? And does the writer know it's not serious? You don't know that.
Truthfully, I think it's a little bit of a blend. Like I think he knows how it comes across.
Yes,
but he's confident enough in himself.
Yes,
that he's okay with it.
Yeah.
And then what I find funny is that each issue has something tangential at the end of, and so like the third one.
Yes.
Okay, so hilarious that the 2008 Eisners for limited series were choosing between dudes who put infographics in their books.
Yes.
Because it's that table, the summary of estimated amusement park related, ride related injuries.
Yes,
which is actually pretty great.
Yes, it's hysterical. Yeah, no,
and then once you're in on it, you're just like, oh no, I love it. And I go back to issue 1, I'm like, no, that's great.
Yeah, I'm with you there. You don't know, again, especially if you come in. It's one thing to come in to this book specifically, coming in blank on who Gerard Way is or might be, or who you think he might be.
And if you think you're reading a first-time writer, you read that as reaching.
Yes,
and you're like, oh, you're trying a little too hard. Get over yourself.
But if you come into it like we did, which is a first-time writer who's also a mega world famous rock star, you think that comes off as being just pretentious nonsense. It's not that he's reaching, it's that he is trying so hard to be cool and funny. You think and that you can imagine him being so pleased with himself, of like, look how funny I am. Look how great this is. Because there is a negative connotation to him coming in and parachuting into comics, or so we think. And yeah, I think that does affect how I read it, and I think it affected you. how you started. Yeah, that's what you were starting to say last week, right? You were starting to say how it took you a couple issues before it settled in. Like, wait a minute, this guy might actually know what he's doing, right?
Well, I think perhaps it was that, like, maybe I'll edit this out later, but perhaps it's that I was like, he's being pretentious, but wait, I'm pretentious. I love it.
Yeah, like, that's true. Yeah,
like I mean, I do love artsy stuff. And this is not why we read it, but I do think there's something inherently pretentious about reading and finishing the unwritten, and podcasting 12, 13 hours on that series because it asks a lot of its reader, and it rewards them. It's not just drudgery. It's very enjoyable, but it's not something that is that accessible, I guess I would say.
Not as accessible.
I think Umbrella Academy is accessible, but because it's like, I think it was when I got to the one where there's a riddle and it's the hourglass and you put the page upside down for the answer. Two bodies I have, they'll both join in one. The stiller I stand, the faster I run. And it was another one where it was similar to like the blog pages on Unwritten, where I was like, not the blog pages. I had re-listened to volumes 1 and 2 of the Unwritten because I also reread those recently, and I was saying the first time through that I didn't know how to read the fantasy interludes. Where we're cut to Tommy Taylor. I was like, is that supposed to be a commentary on the story that's happening here, or is this just breaking up the story and reminding you that this thing exists? And in the same way, I was like, well, is this hourglass thing supposed to be a riddle that is recapping this story or foreshadowing something, or is it just kind of goofy and fun? Just like the infographic about amusement rides or whatever. So, and I think it is just goofy and fun, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I mean, there is, I think much like his band, My Chemical Romance, there is there's big theater kid energy in this comic.
Yeah.
It is kind of, it is big. It is over the top. I think some of the way it's drawn, the very stylized nature of Boss art and Stewart's art colors on top of that. It plays into that, and I think it meshes well with what Way is trying to do and what he accomplishes. And yeah, for me, when I first read it, it seemed like he was throwing a lot of stuff at the wall in those early issues to show that he could do it. It seemed like I didn't know if it was going anywhere. All new characters, all new setup, really like the seemingly high concept origin story. That on one day, all these women got pregnant and gave birth, after having not been pregnant at all. And then, then this eccentric billionaire is going to, adopt as many as he can. He only gets 7, and yet they all have power. This very high concept start to it. You're thinking, is he just throwing this stuff out there? How does this all work? And then as he moved through, I think very quickly for me, I really connected with the characters in that I felt he was able to flesh those out and put them on page and show their personalities, show their each personalities individually and their dynamic within the group very, very quickly, right, and establish that. And you get a sense of, okay, this is what the book is about, because it is this dysfunctional family of superheroes or people with superpowers, I guess. Whether or not the superheroes is maybe debatable, but that kind of coming together. And it reminds me, and I think it's this of one of the, the big influence that I see quoted often is Doom Patrol, specifically the Doom Patrol written by Grant Morrison, which is, again, if you've seen the show on HBO Max or whatnot, or have read those stories, again, that's kind of that's more of the found family, your off kilter, your B, C, D list, quote unquote heroes, people with powers that are thrown together. They're kind of the misfits of the superhero world, or the misfits of like the DC team up universes. Doom Patrol is kind of, the other team. But that kind of ragtag mismatched group is really what he's playing into. And he sets it up so quickly and so efficiently that you get the family dynamic. And I think through that, you also, at least I got a lot of X-Men vibes as well. again, whether that's just the
I mean,
idea
the
of
X-Men's inherently, there.
again,
And I'll
children
say
in a
I'm
school
not an X-Men
training
reader.
with powers. Yeah.
But here's the thing.
You can see those layers on though, right? You can.
Oh yeah, no, I like you definitely
Because
the
they're
fact
broad
that they're all in a mansion,
strokes.
right?
Yeah, they're
right.
broad stroke.
Yeah.
They're broad stroke comparisons there, but you can see that through. Like you can see that DNA. And I said the fact that he was able to establish all these new characters, and right away you know who they are. You don't know exactly what everyone can do, but again, that's not super important. What you know is who they are, what their.
Well, let me just say something about who they are, though.
Okay, sure.
Because there is this thing where he's got Luther, for instance, also known as Number One,
AKA
also known as Space Boy.
Yep.
Right. It's like this is 6 issues. One of the 7 characters has 3 names.
Yeah.
And most of them have multiple names and they use them interchangeably.
Well, yeah, they all have 3. I guess number 5 doesn't, but yeah, all the characters have 3.
This is showing it. So on one hand, I find it a little frustrating as a reader when I'm trying to like get my bearings and they keep calling each other different names. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I take it as a stroke of like he makes this world feel lived in, and it just shows some writing depth. Like I wouldn't like it if they started calling him Luther in the next volume, even though that was like his name the whole time because they called him Number One all through the first one. And it sounds like the writer kind of squeezed it in afterwards because it was like, I don't want to just call him by numbers the whole time.
Yeah.
The fact that he's got all of those things there, and there's probably some like family tones. There's always a little bit of derision when they call him Space Boy.
Yeah.
And there's always a little bit of contempt for their adopted father when you call him Number One.
Yeah. And that's for me. This is what I loved about that, because in those names, in all the names, whether it's what their father called them, Number One, as you find out their mother, the android, she gave them actual names. And then you have your code name when they were, doing their heroing aspect. Each one of those holds a different connotation, and who uses it, when they use it, how they use it.
That's great writing.
Yeah. So
writing.
Do you remember exactly first time through who's Number One, who's Number Two? That it doesn't really matter. But when you see how Luther and Diego react to each other, it's clear one of them was Alpha, one of them was the Beta. Because one of them was Number One, aka the leader, and the guy who was Number Two always feels like he should be Number One, but he was called Number Two. So he could never be the leader.
It's very Leonardo Raphael vibes.
Exactly.
For me.
He wears that disdain of the guy who thinks he should be the leader. So whether or not you remember exactly who everyone's name or number is, you can see that hierarchy fall in place, and the way he's all the interactions are feedback loops into that. And again, I think it's really efficient the way very quickly, because again, the idea is they haven't seen each other for however many years, 8 or 9 years, and they come back together for the first time ever. And we don't know any of their history or their current circumstances. And just by them all coming back to the mansion for their father's funeral and seeing how all of them interact that first time, you get it. You see how they are. You see how the family either does or doesn't work together.
Right. And to borrow your phrase, a lesser writer would have said, would have had Number Two say, I still hate Dad. I can't believe you still like him. What did he ever do for you? Instead, he says, yeah, whatever, Number One.
Yeah.
And it's like, bam, it's just, it's really great writing.
Yeah.
And really great writing. Sometimes you have to chew on it. Sometimes you have to read it again.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any problem with that.
I do think it helps.
It just gave me a little PTSD to like the first time I tried to read the Brothers Karamazov, and they were like, there's a little introductory note, and it's like, just so you know, each of the brothers has like 3 names. They're all Russian. I can't pronounce any of them, but basically any of the name that starts with an I is going to be Ivan's character, and any of the ones that start with an A, it's going to be Alyosha. And I'm like, if you know that, then just translate it that way. Like this, I'm not reading it in Russian. I'm reading it in English. Like, why would you do that? And it's like,
I'm sure it would have been easier to follow though, if it were in a graphic storytelling form, because
that's true.
Other aspect of it, the character design I love from Gabriel that him and Way work together, but obviously everyone is so distinct. Everyone is very specific, and they're always essentially wearing the same thing all the time.
Yes.
There's not a lot of costume change going on there. Everyone looks the way they look throughout the entire story, so it's very obvious who everybody is, even if you can't remember exactly everyone's name and all that. So that obviously helps a ton, really playing into the visual aspect of it. But it is funny. You did mention a lesser writer, and I by no means mean this as any sort of derogatory comment on his style. But one thing my brother and I always talk about and we love are the original G.I. Joe comics. G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, started at Marvel, finished up at IDW. Every issue was written by Larry Hama, and in the G.I. Joe universe, there's like 5 billion characters. And the thing that Larry Hama did in every issue was to make sure that everyone got called out by their name by somebody in like the first couple of pages. So no matter what, even if you read every issue, you knew. So you could pick it up, and even though it would be wildly unnatural if this is a teammate and someone you've known forever, to call them by their name or code name in that situation. It's the idea of like,
which is why like a lot of comics now will have one page with like the little square profile picture of each person in the book.
Have the recap page, Monstrous does that, a great book on an Image. Fables did that a long time. They do that here. But again, what I love about when the Umbrella Academy did, what Way did with these characters, the dialogue he gave them was that whatever name they choose to call each other in that moment, in whatever conversation they're having, it felt natural for what that character would do. So it wasn't just they always call him Luther, or this person always calls him Diego, or number 3 or number 4 or anything like that. They use the term in the moment that feels the most natural for that conversation and that character. So the result is you get that fluidity where sometimes it's by number, sometimes it's by code name, sometimes it's by actual name, and you have to flow with it. And I do think you pick up on it because you start seeing what the character relationships are. You start seeing how everyone comes together, and it makes sense, and it does feel natural, and it doesn't feel awkward. Like, well, why would you call him that this time? Because you didn't the last time. Are you doing it just to remind the reader? Is that just for the reader, or is it for how the characters would act? And I think the way that they defaulted here was it was less about making sure the reader followed everything and more about this is true to the characters in that moment. This is how they would address each other. This is how they would address them after a fight, after a battle, at the funeral, or whatever gathering they have, whatever conversation they're in. This is the most natural way for them to address and talk to each other. And I think that it takes a bit of guts there, because you have to trust your audience is going to follow you. You have to trust they're going along with you and they're not going to get lost, and they don't have to take notes as they read. But I think if you dive in and go with it, it'll come to you quicker.
If you just keep moving and let it wash over you.
Yeah.
You'll
pick up on
it. And that's normally how I would read. Since I'm podcasting, I am taking notes as I go.
That is true.
And I want to make sure that I'm missing anything.
Sure.
And, it's just a better practice when podcasting, especially the first time through material. Just read the thing once and then read it again for note taking.
Absorb it all first. Yeah, definitely.
So anyway, that was all to say Way is an incredible comic writer, an incredible talent. So hopefully, if you're listening to this, I assume you're not dismissive of him, but maybe you're still dipping your toe in the water, still forming an opinion of him. Let that little signal show he's read literature, he's read good comics, he knows what to do. And by the way, I also don't fight. I don't pick any fights with like Larry Hama for doing that. G.I. Joe stunt, because it's what you have to do. But
exactly.
That's like the way that manga, for instance, is published. Like the Shonen Jump Weekly is like a big magazine that comes out, and each chapter in it is another chapter in all of their stories. So every story they have progresses every single week. And when you get, I just finished the series Death Note. When you get to the end of that series, it's all like spying, counter spying, there's not a lot of action, and it's a lot of characters thinking in their head. And the back half of that series is excruciating, because it feels like you'll read 3 chapters in a row where they're just thinking to themselves about the plot that's already happened in case someone happens to be jumping in on the 73rd chapter of a weekly thing.
Yeah.
And it at what point do you say, screw the new people? We're like, we're just going to move forward with the plot.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's a brutal way to publish.
Well, but it makes more sense for a long ongoing thing, just like Real American Hero was. That went 300 issues across 2 different publishers, almost across
especially
like 30
if
some odd years.
Kids are going to pick up.
Exactly.
Kids don't pay attention to like, oh, do I have the whole run? Like they're like, I like that cover. I love G.I. Joe. Great, give me that one.
Yes, that is the epitome of every comic could be someone's first comic. You know,
right.
Like as much as I adhere to that and I love it, I'm not handing you Umbrella Academy number 4 as your first comic. Like that is counterproductive to both the reader and the comic itself. That's not, that premise and idea works for a lot of stuff from the big 2 and the big ongoing titles. And I love that idea because that's how everyone starts reading. And again, I think the first thing I read was a random issue of G.I. Joe. That's how I got into reading at all, not just comics. But again, that doesn't work when you're talking about, I don't think it works when you're talking about series like this, something that's self-contained, whether it's, most things we cover here that are these short contained narratives or even long contained narratives, something like The Unwritten that went 60 some odd plus issues. It is unreasonable to think that starting in the middle there makes any sense when it does make sense for something that's been long and ongoing over multiple years and decades. That does make sense. So there you need to have that onboarding at the start of the issue to get everybody on there. And if you have been reading since day one, if you read every single issue, you just have to accept that's how the issue is going to go. But it would feel wildly unnatural and out of place if in issue 5 of this book, they did that kind of recap of like, hey, remember that thing we did 2 issues ago?
Right.
And again, if the characters in the story were to address each other as if they've never addressed each other before, as if they weren't this history between them that the characters know and the reader now knows. It makes sense the way it's done here is that you understand that the way they're talking to each other is how you would talk to someone if this was your sibling who had grown up on the super team and then you grew apart. Like the same things, the same feelings, both good and bad, would come up, and that comes out in how you address each other. And again, that's for the characters in the story in terms of it's focused on that and less on the reader's experience, potentially reader's experience of maybe you get lost a little bit if you forgot someone's name for a page or 2. They assume you're going to catch up. They assume you're going to get back with the program if you keep going.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. So what Way knows his way around comics.
Yep.
Number 2, we had I likened this colors alone, but also conceptually to Black Hammer.
Yeah.
And I know it's similar to a lot of other like I'm going to call them all X-Men style ensemble hero stuff.
Yeah.
Honestly,
I would go further than that and say it's not just X-Men specific, but I think any superhero universe adjacent.
Sure. Yeah.
It's that kind of world. Yeah.
And I think what I like about both this and Black Hammer is they kind of start the same way that like Golden Era stuff started. So like now whenever like DC or Marvel decides to do a reboot of the universe, which is, roughly every 10 years now, whether it's New 52 or Rebirth, whatever, they always want to start with a new number 1, and they always want to tell you the character's origin story because they assume that's the right place to start for a new reader.
Yeah.
That is not how comics started. Like Batman's origin story did not come up, right away in Detective 27.
Yeah.
Not all of these characters started. Sometimes they just started with like a crazy power.
Yeah.
Like Spider-Man didn't start with like a true origin story like it would if you started a Spider-Man number 1 now.
Yeah.
And Black Hammer starts at the end of their career.
Yes.
And, looks backward. And most of the storytelling is looking back at how things got the way they are now.
Yeah.
Umbrella Academy gives you like 4 pages of like, it all started when all these women had this thing happen all at once. And then it jumps to after their heroing days are over.
Yes.
And
then you see glimpses. here and there of them as kids. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And
you
so I think a
in
lesser
media res,
writer,
basically.
like someone who's only versed in modern comics, would feel like, well, I'm going to need to do one-shot issues on each of the 7 kids to explain their origin story. And I'm going to need to
there is a version.
Is that not how Marvel or DC would want to do it?
Yes, there is a
version. A bunch of number
book.
ones that are all one shots with a bunch of variants, and you have to exposit every character before you can tell a story.
Yeah, or maybe not before you tell them, but that would be integrated in the storytelling, where you would have to focus on each one.
To me, it would be even worse.
It'd be a tougher read. But no, there's a version of this comic where, you follow them through where the story is about the Umbrella Academy when they're 8 years old. We see that one adventure at the Eiffel Tower. That's, you would follow them through their introduction to the world as a superhero team. Because obviously, when we see them at the end, when they're adults, we see that they had a history. The Umbrella Academy was a thing. The public knew about them. They were out there doing things. So another version of this comic is that story. And you see the story of how they were as kids, and you see those relationships grow, and then you see how Ben dies. You see how 5 disappears. You see how the team breaks apart. You experience Vanya's isolationism and disgruntlement as she grows older, being set apart. You experience all that in real time and read the story, as opposed to getting dropped in at the end, like you said, and looking backwards. It's a different way to tell the story, and I think it's. I don't know if that other version would be as interesting,
I think it would definitely be. It would take so long to get off the ground before it could be interesting.
Because then you're just telling another superhero story,
right?
And again, I think
you're just regurgitating the formula, and not even like the historic formula.
Yeah,
just the modern formula, which is designed. I'm like, this may be cynical. It's designed to sell books. To new readers.
It's designed to hook readers. Absolutely. To say, come in at the ground floor. Here's the beginning. Here's the start. You haven't missed anything, as opposed to handing someone Batman's 567 and you realizing inherently before you pick it up, well, there's 566 issues before this. Do I need to read all that stuff?
Which was daunting to me when I came into comics, and then people were like, screw it. Don't just start.
Yes. It is absolutely daunting for books like that. But again, those are designed to have people on board at various times. And even though they do everything they can with legs and whatever, blah, 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 you can pick up one of those comics and start reading. And if you like it, you decide to go forward or backward, however far, you want to go. If that hooks you, then you're in and you can find your way in. For books like this, it's hard. You got to start with one, and you have to have a hook that keeps you intrigued. And the hook here is finding out how this broke up, because we are at the end, and the timeline is moving is moving forward. There is a story they're trying to tell from the current day on, but you're filling in all these gaps. And instead of it being what the book is about, those past events that we don't see or we see flashbacks of, all that does is inform character. It informs the relationships. And again, it forms, we talked about the hierarchy of all these kids. Oh, now they're not kids now. It forms the hierarchy within the Umbrella Academy. Again, the numbering system that's inherent in what their father gave them. And then you see how that, for a lot of them, that resentment builds. Obviously the one who didn't resent them was number one, because he was number one. He's the one that had the greatest admiration for the father, because he was given the most to do. He was the most trusted. He was literally the first, so you see how that trickles down, and all that does is fill in this backstory and makes the characters richer, as opposed to wasting time. Feels harsh, but that's what it would be to me. Wasting time saying the book is about the actions that are happening, because that's what the book would have been. Oh, here's another adventure. It's another thing they did. And you're reading to see what happens next with them. Adventure wise, who's the next villain they take down, who's that sort of thing, progressing in real time with them as they grow up. And to me, that's less interesting for a book like this, especially when, again, as it's set in this framework of these superhero teams, whether they're found families or not. It's a subgenre of comic that I really love, and that's what I where we were starting to get to last week, especially when you mentioned how this is not Watchmen. It's not a deconstruction of the superhero comic. It is not trying to comment or say anything about superheroes. It is simply using the pre-existing knowledge of superheroes and the superhero team and the superhero family, the stuff that if you haven't even read comics but you're familiar with, whether it's the X-Men or the Avengers, the Justice League, whatever it is, you have a level of understanding of how the dynamics of those teams work, of how teams of superpowered beings work together. And you're simply telling your spin on that. Black Hammer is the exact same way, which is why I love that kind of book. You see the archetypes,
right?
You have the leader who thinks everything he's doing is right, is kind of blinded by that. Then the second in command, who's also kind of the bad boy, he's the rogue, because he's always second guessing because he thinks he should be in charge. But then the reason he's not in charge is because if you gave that guy any actual responsibility, he'd probably collapse and fold. But he's deluded himself in thinking that.
But then you have the smart one.
Yeah. You have the smart one. You have you have kind of the reluctant, the powerful reluctant lead, a member. You have all these different factions there, and because that idea is so ingrained through 80 plus years of superhero comics, all you need is that loose framework, and you can build your story around it. And if you're good enough, if you're smart enough, you can tell an interesting story on that. And I said, the Umbrella Academy and Black Hammer are two of my favorites. One of my absolute favorites is Kurt Busiek's Astro City, which is an entire sprawling world of superheroes and that pulls in archetypes from all over, from all different types. And it's so fulfilling if you have read Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, X-Men, Fantastic Four. If you have that knowledge, it's so fulfilling because you can see how he pulls those ideas and just gives them a little bit of a twist and tells his own story with them, but that story couldn't exist if those other superhero stories didn't come before it, much like the Umbrella Academy. Tom King's first novel is a book called A Once Clouded Sky, the exact same idea. It's a city and a world of superheroes that are all familiar to people who have read superhero stories, but he's giving his own little twist, his own little spin on it, but it relies on that pre-existing knowledge. And I think what Way and Baugh do here is the same thing. You don't have to have read all those types of books, but you have to know they exist. You have to know that it's a thing, it's an idea, it's a concept that works as a story. And then you can see how they've grafted their own characters, their own plots, their own kind of mechanics and machinations on it to tell their own story. But yeah, it's not about breaking it down. It's not commenting on it, just saying this is a tried and true way to tell a story. So here's our spin on it. Here's our different take on it. Here's our version of these types of characters. Enjoy, take it for what it is. Don't read any deeper into it. It's all about, here's a kind of story that we know people like. We hope you like our take on it.
Yeah. And I think I've said this about Black Hammer in the past. I think it's for the modern audience in that sense, because like Black Hammer and Umbrella Academy will both tell a golden age style ensemble thing, but without some of the more cringier elements of golden age style comics. It has modern sensibilities to it.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think, that's a strength. And obviously, everything will age eventually.
Of course. Yeah.
Which is why we're still allowed to tell new stories, and we still need to tell new stories. Because even if they're similar beats, they hit differently in different ages, which,
yes,
I just think, and I think I've praised this before again, but like the way the Russo brothers adapted like Captain America for the second movie, they were like, okay, well, we're going to take that shiny golden age hero. We're not going to change him, but the whole world around him changed.
Yeah.
Like, how do those values hold up in this world?
Yeah. And how would he react in this world now? Not how does he react as Captain America we know him to be? How would this version of him that we know
actually allowing the thing to grow?
Yes, exactly.
Beyond the original conception of it.
Yeah.
And so I think you say like, okay, well, like, old man has a mansion, fills him with adopted kids, tries to get him into a super team.
Yeah.
It's not a cakewalk for Charles Xavier.
Yeah.
but generally has gone better than any other comic adaptation envisions that going.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, oh,
it's
yeah, and absolutely, yeah, yeah,
you certainly don't end up loving the Charles Xavier character
yeah.
in any world except the X-Men world.
Mm-hmm.
And
But
that's
yeah,
more a relic of like,
but and as time has gone on, especially through more modern days, and even now in the current X-Men age, more and more people are looking back, being like, Charles is he's kind of a jerk, you know. Kitty Pryde said that famously, back in the day.
Creepy.
But, yeah, but you look back and be like, wait, is he actually good? Was he actually right? Should we have followed that? There was more questioning of it now, and because the readers who grew up with the X-Men, who are now the people creating and writing the X-Men, have those thoughts. They can now put those back into the characters and look back and be like, yeah, you know what we were doing back then, maybe it wasn't so good. Maybe all these things didn't work out. Maybe all that stuff they went through really screwed us up. And I specifically love kind of one of the always troublesome parts of Charles, and that grafts directly onto the Umbrella Academy, is the character of Vanya. She, in a lot of ways, is kind of
I was getting Dark Phoenix vibes.
Exactly. She is a mirror of Jean Grey. The idea of, you are so powerful. Instead of trying to help you understand that and control it, we're going to suppress that and tell you can't do anything, which again, to any rational human being, seems like the worst possible idea.
Right. It's like, that's, I was like,
in the history of everything, that has backfired 100% of the time. Like, that has never worked out. So,
yeah. But clearly there must be, at least on the theoretical level, a non-0% chance that it will work, right?
I guess
it's like, and if you had to choose between that, someone finding something really powerful and choosing not to exploit it and suppress it, or Wilson Taylor from the Unwritten and forging something unfathomably powerful and hoping that it works out all right.
Yeah.
Which one do you choose?
There's not a whole lot of difference there, really, for being honest. There's not a whole lot of it's a very fine line there. But yeah, no, there is that idea of just just the idea of suppression, and that goes in you can, there the metaphor is so much greater, of not just superpowers, of just anything, of telling someone, again, the idea of it's a line from The Incredibles, right? If everybody's special, then no one is. That right. But there's not actually truth in there, because everyone is special in their own way, and that sounds very Hallmark cardy, but it is true. The idea of, it's not about what you can do, and it's about understanding who you are and your capabilities, and that's what makes you special. That's what makes every person special and unique. And so the idea of suppressing that, any part of that, whether it is a superpower, as we see Vanya's is the ability to turn sound, like wield sound into force, whether it's that powerful or whatnot, or like Jean Grey is, she's an Omega level mutant, it's specifically an Omega level telepath, meaning she is more powerful than Charles is. Jean's an Omega level there, Charles is not, and yet he's the one dictating, well, we're going to put the clamps on you, we're going to put the brakes on you, because we can't trust you to grow up to wield this power properly and correctly. So, that worked out very poorly for everybody when Phoenix and Dark Phoenix came out. But again, there's a level of hubris there. That's what I'm trying to say. There's a level of hubris there from the mentor. Teacher, the mentor. Yeah. Thank you. That's the word there. That always backfires, and that's I think that's the most clear X-Men analog for me. Is the character of Vanya, because of that. And again, there are other
and I'm not even a big X-Men fan, and that one, that beat was hitting me right in the face.
Yeah.
Here's my advice: if you're gonna suppress the power of someone who has this, pushing force energy with sound, and they learned how to play violin, you owe it to society not to introduce them to the work of Igor Stravinsky. Get them into, like, I don't know, the Charlie Daniels band or something. It's like, a mean devil went down to Georgia. That's not going to end the world. But
Rite of
Spring,
Are you kidding? Some of those licks in that Charlie Daniels plays, that fiddle, that would absolutely end the world in some ways.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking it wasn't an orchestra. You know, it was a solo performance.
Okay,
Rite of Spring.
Okay, maybe she doesn't end the world, but by herself as a solo, she set her house on fire.
Oh, yeah, no, the neighborhood's gone. But yeah, but again, we're talking about minimizing damage. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
So, but Stravinsky, so I'm sure you're familiar with this, being a Sorkin fan, and but in the 2016, the good Steve Jobs movie, not the Ashton Kutcher one, the Michael Fassbender one.
Oh yeah, sure.
He's making his pitch very early on in the movie for his Macintosh, and he says, you know, you look at their faces when they see it. When they see what it is, they won't know what they're looking at, or why they like it, but they'll know they want it. And his assistant says, not instantly. When people heard Rite of Spring, they tore the chairs out of the theater. They didn't buy the record. And Steve says, Rite of Spring happens to be the most provocative and revolutionary piece of symphony in the last century. And she says, it was a ballet. Which is, I just wanted to read because it's great Sorkin dialogue. Yeah. But that is true. The piece was so provocative that people were ripping the chairs out of the auditorium and throwing them at the stage. And if you've heard Rite of Spring, by the way, I think I have two different conductors and symphonies playing it on vinyl record. Both of each of them is about 40 minutes, which I think is about what it would take. You could put on the record, sit down and read the Apocalypse Suite, and probably be ending the Rite of Spring about the time it's playing in the.
That seems about right. If about 40, that seems about right. Yeah,
and it's
yourself. Yeah,
and it is that provocative of a like it's like it's one of those pieces where like I like classical music. I'm not an aficionado, but I listen to a lot of it and have like broad stroke buckets that I can put things in. And I will try to introduce people to. I'm like, so you can clearly hear that this is Bach, right? This is, you know, it's very mathematical and all this other thing. Like this one is clearly Mozart. You know, he loves a minor key and he has all this flourish and they're like, it just sounds like classical music.
Sure,
that will not happen with Rite of Spring. If you put on like Rite of Spring, or if you put on like John Cage or someone like you're gonna know you're not listening to, like, you know, it's not Tchaikovsky, it's not Rachmaninoff, it's not. You know, one of these famous composers. This is something just categorically and substantively different. Yeah. And I love that this is Gerard Way saying, like, look, I'm really into comics, but I know my music.
Yeah.
Like, and it's
I think I agree. I think that's a bit of a musician flex, not rock star flex. That's
not a rock star flex.
Yeah.
Just to say, like,
I think, yes,
I'm a rock star who knows.
Yeah, I know my stuff.
Classical music in ballet.
I know my stuff. Yeah.
But it's also like, I mean, I feel like there was like this list probably around the time this book came out, like 2008, of like things you'll find in a hipster's home. And it was like, you know, there was it was always like the book Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, completely unread.
Yes.
The orange boxes of Arrested Development DVDs when it was like before it was on Netflix and you know, it was canceled and you had to be like a hardcore fan to be really into it.
Yep.
And I feel like Rite of Spring was probably on that list, you know.
I mean, Rite of Spring on vinyl, probably. That was
on vinyl, yeah.
Yeah, because the sounds they're richer and fuller than, you know,
right. You get
digital.
The crackling sound too.
Yeah. I gotta say though, I know it. I've heard plenty of music and performances. I would like to be moved by anything, good or bad, to the point of tearing the seats out of them. I mean, I would love to experience that, either if it's great or terrible. I can honestly say I've never been to anything that moves me that way. I've been to plenty of stuff that I have loved and has moved me to tears. Stuff that I've been like, this is the absolute garbage, but never have I been like, you know what I got to do? I got to stand up and tear this chair out of its out of the ground and chuck it the stage. I've never been at that level. And
how close have you been to that level? Because I gotta say, whatever the gradation is, I was one. No, not for live. I'm thinking of a movie I went to
Okay,
where I was one small step away.
A movie is the closest I would have been. Yeah, but there's no one there to hit there. I don't know.
Someone needed to have been hit. And it was me in the end, because I went and paid money to see the movie Holmes and Watson with Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly.
Oh,
it's like those two
is
dudes.
That bad? Honestly, I've never seen it.
It was so bad. You couldn't even laugh at how unfunny it was. And it was just like, man, Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly, you think the two of them would be accidentally funny. Like, even if they swing and miss, just seeing the two of them should be funny. And like, every critic hated it. And I thought, well, I like those guys, and I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan. Like, I've consumed every Sherlock Holmes piece of content that exists. I've read all of the Conan Doyle stuff and all of the Anthony Horowitz stuff, and I've got my issue of Batman and Sherlock Holmes. It was like 585 or something in the 80s. Sherlock Holmes entered the Batman universe for whatever reason, and I was like, that's stupid, but it's Sherlock Holmes. Like, I'm all in. So anyway, I saw that horrible movie.
Should have skipped that one though, huh?
I did, yes. But I walk out of the movie, but it felt like not nearly enough. I was like, it feels like I should just take my popcorn and just dump it all over all the seats or something. But it's like, that's punishing the wrong party.
Yeah.
It would have felt more cathartic if it was a live event, I guess.
I will say, I guess the closest I would have come to that emotion actually would have been a live sporting event. But that's easy though. Like, if your team loses, and when you're there, that's an easy emotion of just like anger, tear this up. But a performance or something like that, where you're meant to sit and something is presented to you versus, a sporting event has an outcome that you could win or lose or whatnot. But yeah, I can't think of a live performance where I've been moved to like that. But you know what? I'm still relatively young. It could happen someday. Because what a sight that would have been to be there and be like, they're tearing the seats out. Like, really? Like, is it really that bad? That'd have been nuts.
So you're a musical theater lover. I'm going to say, if I was ever in a situation where I had to sit through a live production of Into the Woods, I may be tempted to rip my chair out. That's only because I saw the movie version.
Oh, Into the Woods is incredible.
My wife and I were sitting in the movie, and like the last song, just like, we were just like, what is this thing we're watching? And the last song felt like we were being punked, like it was on a loop and it wouldn't end. And my wife, seriously, not joking, turns to like everyone were there. It was like 5-6 people, and she's like, do we just leave? Like, does it have an ending, or like, is it just gonna keep playing this song forever? Everyone lost it.
I love Into the Woods. Oh, you know what? There is
but I didn't know what I was getting into. I knew nothing. I didn't even know it was a musical. I just showed up because my friend group was going. Right.
Okay.
And so, and I'm not a big musical lover. I need a trigger warning when it's a musical.
Okay. All right. Well, then that's a different bridge we got to cross.
I know we have our Rishi Josh dynamic from the West Wing Weekly.
I do. Yeah, I do. I love Into the Woods. It's not the best Sondheim, but it may be my favorite Sondheim because it was my first Sondheim where I learned who he was, and went from there and learn about the rest of his shows. But yeah, I can't think of a performance that would have moved me. And I don't think Rite of Spring would have done it to me as well. I
don't think so. No, but
yeah. But maybe at the time
I sat through a low quality high school production of Pippin, and
that's tough.
I was like, I think if it were a middle school production, I would have ripped my chair out.
You have to adjust, but see, you have to adjust for the average though. You have to understand that the bar for middle school performance or high school performance or community theater, there are different.
Right. No, and it would my chair would be taken out and thrown at like the director for the school. It's like, why would you have picked Pippin for middle schollers? This is like the most obnoxious, self-absorbed character. Middle schoolers do not need any of that in their lives. And
that's actually pretty funny to think about. That's actually pretty funny to think about a middle school production of Pippin.
It's basically what would happen on the,
I think I'd applaud that. I think I said I just the gall of that.
Yeah, well, the sheer bravado.
Seriously.
You're not a Gilmore Girls fan, right?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I don't think against it. I've never seen it though.
Yeah, there was just a great like the fans of the show know that every time Daniel, who's is it Amy Sherman Palladino? That's her show. That and Marvelous Miss Maisel. Her husband Daniel Palladino, when he directs an episode, there's always something weird like that. Like it will be Kirk, who's the guy who is in Guardians of the Galaxy. It's James Gunn's brother, Sean Gunn.
Oh yeah.
Sean Gunn's character will be like part of a middle school production in town, and there was one where they had children doing Pippin and like throwing sparkle like glitter all over the audience, and it's like for like a CW caliber show, it's like, oh, okay, that's like a funny joke, but Daniel Palladino has like this Andy Kaufman-ish thing of like, I'm gonna push this for 5-6 minutes, like no one will find it funny anymore, and then we stop. And I love his sense of humor in that way. And good. Like just watching it hit everyone. Yeah.
No, I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that.
So anyway, that's all the Rite of Spring tangent. Yeah, that was all. Yeah. But it was a great pool. And that was another one where it's like, it's a combination of things. And this is where no one else could have really written this. Right. It's like, this is similar Black Hammer, but I don't know if Jeff Lemire would have ever pulled Rite of Spring out and said like, oh, here's a character whose ability is tied to musical instrument, and here's the most provocative piece of music ever performed live. We're gonna stick them together. It's like, it's not like he couldn't have researched it, but it's like, this is just the unique combination of things that make Gerard Way who he is.
I would agree. I think it is pulling. It is pulling from strengths, things that he would know, things that would be inherent in him. You mentioned Jeff Lemire. So what are the things he's going to pull in? I don't know, anything Canadian. Those things come naturally to him.
A farm.
Farm, middle of nowhere,
plaid
hockey
shirts.
This is what he's going to do. So it would have been weird. I guess it would have been weird if there were no musical aspect to it. But again, I think there is, on one hand, you could look at it and think, okay, there's a pretty pompous idea of like music brings about the apocalypse, from a rock star. There is but at the same idea, I think it works though because of the execution. But I do think on its surface you see that, and it's because I guess you don't actually get to. Well, I guess it is called Apocalypse Suite, and so if you have an understanding, you can have a sense of where that was going, because the idea that Vanya as the white violin is the cause of the apocalypse that number 5 talks about, that doesn't come for like issue 4, maybe issue 3 or something like that. That she doesn't turn to the white violin, and then that becomes the narrative thrust for the end of the arc. So, but when you start off, you don't actually know that that's what it's building towards. But again, maybe you could figure it out from the subtitle Apocalypse Suite. But yeah, that's a pretty grandiose idea coming from a musician, coming from a rock star. Music can change the world. That's what they think about. And here he's twisting that, and that music is going to end the world. This is going to bring about
which is what people always have said about rock and roll, or parents.
That is true. Yeah. So I
think
it feels natural for him. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's actually a very similar beat to what Mike Carey was saying in The Unwritten. It's like
the power of stories,
right? The power of stories. Yes. Here's an author writing about the power of stories. Here's a musician writing about the power of music. Mm-hmm. And in both cases, they see the positive and negative of it.
And using their experience to understand that we talk about deconstructing, like they don't got to think about this. They know the ins and outs of it because it's kind of ingrained, it's embedded in them. So when they put that mechanic and that detail into their story, it comes out very naturally. It comes out very fluidly, and it's easy for the reader to get into it because they're able to articulate those ideas very seamlessly. And the idea of, oh yes, this is a superpower, it connects back to, we see Vanya as a kid with the violin, and she hates and this is what she has to do. The kids, it all comes together very quickly. And again, I think efficiently is the word I use, because again, all this comes to a head before the end of it doesn't end with her becoming the white violin and ending the world,
I can see this easily being a 12-issue arc in the hands of many writers.
Where the first arc ends with Vanya turning, and you're like, oh, she's the villain now, And then the next arc is what we see of her taking over the orchestra and doing all that. That happens very quickly. So very quickly we have to establish who all these characters are, what her specific place in the family is, and her relationship to music, specifically the violin, and then that transformation into her kind of final state there and her ultimate form and the weapon that she becomes. That all happens halfway through the comic, through the run. And then the back half is them actually stopping the actually story part, the plot part of stopping the apocalypse, or trying to stop the apocalypse, trying to stop Vanya. So that all happens very, very quickly, and it all makes sense. It all happens so seamlessly and so smoothly. Again, if you read through it, I don't think you get lost at all. I don't think you have questions about what characters' motivations are, what the relationships are. He handles that so well. The storytelling is done so well that you get it all. And it does happen very quickly. Things happen very quickly than I think most comics. And I don't know if that's a case of he didn't know what more story he was going to tell. Sometimes you do get these first time, or at least first major kind of publishing. You try to get all those ideas out, that Mark Russell thing, it's going to get canceled here. So I'm going to throw everything I have out there. Yeah. I'm going to put everything I have.
I'm taking all the cheese.
Yeah. I'm throwing it all out there at once. And I don't think Way does that here. Way and Bob, they don't throw everything they have out there, but they do move quickly. There's not a lot of downtime. They're managed to get all their exposition out either through quick flashbacks or through interactions of the characters in real time. You get everything, all the backstory, all the relationships, and what the story is, the plot is, all that narratively moves in one direction. But they fill it all very quickly, very efficiently, without a lot of wasted space. There's not a lot of fat on this in this comic, especially in this first arc.
No, and my last note, I mean, we don't do obviously a beat by beat recap. Yeah. But my last note was just on that. And at the time I wrote my notes and read this, I had not seen any of the show. Now I've watched the first episode.
Okay.
And at the beginning, end of chapter 4, when we're following 5 into the diner and the guys come up behind him, and he's got that look in his eye like he is going to end these guys.
Yeah.
And that cuts away and you don't see anything else until the splash page of issue 5, which is just the big blood splattered diner.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that was so great, because so many people would have made a meal out of all the shots. And I was like, I'm sure the show will not show that kind of restraint. And the show did not show that kind of restraint. The show was yes, we have the adrenaline pumping action scene. We can show him teleporting and doing all crazy stuff.
And that's the kind of thing, though. But because of the different medium, I think you need to show, because they haven't had the time to really establish the character. That gives them an opportunity to do that. But that is wasteful. I think it's wasteful in a comic to do that, to show just pages of a bunch of quick panels,
I mean, it can be done well. Like, I think of
it can be done. I think if it's the point of the story, of the plot, of how he does it.
Yeah.
All we need to know is that he gets out of there and he destroys everybody. The show needs.
So to me, this reminded me of in the Winter Soldier, when they get the little MacGuffin quest to get Sam's Falcon suit back.
Oh yes,
and it's how are we going to break into this? And it's just a hard cut. Yeah, they have it. Well, it's like there's no question that they're going to get it, and that's not what the movie is. And it was just perfect.
I love that scene where he's like, he's behind this state guardian, blah blah blah, and the camera cuts to Natasha, and she shrugs, and then Steve is like, shouldn't be a problem. And you're right. And then next cut, we have it. Yeah, because that's not what it's about there, because we don't need to see that from them. But I think in the show, because 5 has now come back, and he comes back earlier in the story they're telling, because he comes back, if you think about episode 1 is like issue 1, I guess, because 5 doesn't come back right then. Now he's there. So they're setting up more of his story, also because they know kind of where they're going. I think what they want to do going forward in the story, because all this has been out before they did the show. So they need to establish that character, because it's important for the audience there to see what he can do. It's less important for us now, because again, his powers aren't important. And Also, visually teleporting doesn't work as well. No shots at Nightcrawler, but like teleporting on a static page doesn't work because he just is in a panel that isn't in a panel and then shows up again in a panel, and that can work well if done right. But yeah, in the diner in live action, it works so well because you can see, you're doing the portal thing where you jump through, and like with Doctor Strange and all them. When him and Wong do the portals and you can move in and out and all that stuff, it visually works a lot better in live action. So, but I did have a note that I didn't catch. I remembered one of these notes, but I didn't remember the other one when I reread it here. Again, talking about kind of Way and Ba, and I think this is probably on Gerard Way's writing here in terms of where they think the story is going and what they're trying to tell, is that in this first arc, obviously there's a heavy foreshadowing when Five is talking to Pogo, and he's talking about what he was like when he was trapped, blah, 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 all his jumping through time. And there's just a kind of a cliffhanger where he's like, well, I guess it goes back to the Kennedy assassination. And then he puts the monocle on and he sees it there, and then it stops, and we don't come back to that. Obviously, you think Kennedy assassination, you think of Dallas, Texas. Volume 2 is called Dallas, Right. So when you look back on it, you see that foreshadowing there. And that one I remember because it's kind of very obvious and it's very forefront. The one I didn't remember was after the attack or during the attack on the carnival, when the team gets back together again, Luther says something about blah, 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 blah. Father said he'd never escape the hotel. And that's it. Nothing else is there. And there's no mention, no hint to it. That's a throwaway line. But now looking back on it, volume 3, what's it called? Hotel Oblivion.
Right.
So
the whole thing's mapped out. Yeah. And that much is clear.
Yeah. So whether or not the story exactly is mapped out, these beats, these ideas, he had in his mind what the hotel was. Whether or not he was going to tell that story, whether that was going to be the focal point of a story, who knows? But he had enough of the world to understand that this is what they did with their bad guys. It's like their Arkham Asylum. He worked out those mechanics, and he knew what that was. So he could drop that in there. If he never goes back to it, he never goes back to it. Whether or not he always knew from the jump that volume 2, we're going to go to Dallas and we're going to have involved in that, is less important than him saying Five was traveling through time and he ended up in the future and he got stuck there. But before then, he was traveling all throughout time and history. By him mentioning Dallas and JFK and things like that, to me, that says that Way put some thought into, he knows where Five jumped to, which means he knows what those 50 years were like, because that's how long he spent lost. So he has a plan. Whether or not he actually executes exactly what those are, whether he shows all those pieces, again, that's unimportant, but it shows that he put enough thought into it to put breadcrumbs in this first arc that he could or could not return to, again, to maybe retroactively show how clever he is and how much he planned it. But it does show there is some level of planning,
Right.
It's not completely slapdash, that he put these ideas in there. He put these elements in there, which allowed him to go back and make that connective tissue real and tangible, and not just throwaway lines. So I love looking back on that and seeing, oh yeah, we get no hints. There are no spoilers about anything other than a mention of the Kennedy assassination and the mention of capital T, capital H of the hotel. There's nothing else there. So it isn't like he's dropping all these hints. It's just these elements that when you look back at the currently, as of now, completed series, you can see that these ideas were there from the start.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I think we come back to this question a lot, whether he knew every beat in advance and was like foreshadowing it, or whether he was just laying pipe to see if he would use it later.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
It's giving him either way. It's understanding that this thing could last more. So he's giving himself the leeway. He's giving himself
right.
outs.
So you don't have to scratch. You're not,
yes.
You're sticking. If you come back to write more, you're digging into fertile soil rather than hitting dry, hard ground and just kicking up dust.
Yeah. It works both ways of, if there's no more, there's nothing left unanswered, but he hasn't written himself into a corner where he has to start completely new. because there's a version of this book that tells the same story, then it comes to the end and it's like to be continued. Well, then what's the next story? The next story could have easily been a great story that's a completely brand new idea with the same characters. But because he gave himself some outs there, you can tie it back to that one panel of 5 saying, well, I guess it goes back to the Kennedy assassination,
Right.
Now there's tissue there. When you come back for the third one, which again wasn't supposed to take 10 years, it was announced only a year after Volume 2 came out. So he had some idea of where it was going to go. It just production-wise, it took a while. But you can go back to and you can hook on to something from, I think that's like issue 3 or 4 when Luther says that. And again, total throwaway line. You can hook back onto that and have it anchor to your first arc there and not feel like, oh, we've just generated something completely brand new out of nowhere because we have to tell a new story. We're telling a new story that, oh, wait, it feels like it's anchored in the world because it is anchored in the world because they made it naturally fit to what they started out in the first arc, So yeah, whether or not it was planned all the way 100% or he just had enough foresight to know he could go back to it, either way, it shows a level of planning and understanding of how the mechanics of the storytelling works.
Yeah, which it's just a certain level of sophistication as a writer.
Yeah, it's knowing the medium. It's having read enough comics too. It's having read enough comics to have like through osmosis taken that in and know that that's important and know they have to give himself outs and know to give himself options to not put himself into a corner, not put all of his ideas out there at once, not overstimulate the reader. I think that comes from for him a lifetime of taking this medium in. It's second nature.
Yeah, I would have to. Although I think
the story's that way, probably
that type of storytelling is not limited to comics. I think.
Oh no!
I would say the same thing about a good 3-act play.
Yeah.
But
I'm saying specifically for him, I'm guessing a lot of that is comic work, and so when he's then regurgitating it to his own storytelling, which is also in comics, those are his reference points. Those are the things he's thinking. Well, I say thinking about. He may not be thinking about them. They just may be innate in him. He just may know that and accept it because that's how his brain has been trained.
Yeah. Well, those are all the notes I have for Volume 1.
Yeah.
Again, it's not a beat by beat, and I don't feel like even doing a character by character breakdown because I don't know what's gonna be important later. Like
Yeah. Well, and again,
I'm taking this trade as it is.
Yeah. No, and I think again, it's the story, the actual narrative plot points. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I like the idea. It's all about the family dynamic. It's all about how these siblings, this found family that is, for all they know, they are their family, how they come together, how they broke apart, how they are now as broken people trying to come back together as adults. That's what's important about the story. Again, the specifics of time travel and their various powers and even their origin stories of how they got them and what they are, stopping the apocalypse. None of that to me in this story is super, super important. What I like is I like the characters. And again, part of that is I love the design. I love the artwork from Ba, and I love the sketches in the back of that first trade. You see really some of the tests, and you see how some of the evolution there. I love seeing all that stuff. I love seeing that process. So I love the design of the characters. I love how they look. I love the interaction. And for me, when I return to the story, I like seeing that because again, even though some of those beats are very tropish and played out, because I read a lot of X-Men. When you read X-Men, Fantastic Four, any of these team up books, you see these kind of dynamics. But I love seeing them done at a high level, which I think they've done here, because it's just about that specific twist that he has in this world. Their specific test of again their origin, which is not actually specifically important, but the fact that it's unique to them.
Right.
Their origin of their powers is a unique idea to this story, and that bonds them, and how that affects all the relationships going forward. To me, that's what's interesting about the story, are these characters and their relationship to each other. And then whatever story they're in, whatever battle they're in, whatever villain they face is secondary. Again, which is why I wouldn't have liked that other version of the comic where it's just recounting the tales of the Umbrella Academy as children saving the world. That would be less interesting to me.
It's one of those things where it's like, if this went on for 10 trades or whatever, and then you needed like a little victory lap,
It'd be
fan
a
service.
Yes.
Yeah.
It would.
And I wouldn't begrudge someone that, if they made it that far and it went that long and you had the fan base, sure, have fun.
And that could be under the heading of the Tales of the Umbrella Academy, if it was like Tales of the Umbrella Academy year 1, and it's all stories about them that first year when they come out in the world as 8-year-olds as a superhero team. If they want to do that, just separate from the main narrative, just say, here are these stories, we're going to tell them in a separate miniseries, that kind of thing I could be okay with. I would read that and be great. But
as long as it's not, I mean, there's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it, right?
But I would want that to be separate. Like, here is a miniseries about this first year. We're going to tell that, as opposed to it being like a flashback arc in the main series.
I agree. Yeah.
Right.
But even within that,
separate.
I think if it came well after and it was like, oh, here's a 5-year-old Vanya, just wandering around the grocery store, and oh, look, she found a flyer for violin lessons. Yeah. And it's like, oh my gosh,
no doubt, there's a way it could be very bad. There's a way it could be very bad.
It's a very Brady Christmas way to do it.
Yes, there's also a way to do it where it's just, here are these characters in a different version, the younger version. We've only seen a piece of them. Here are just some fun adventures. We're going to tell that and fill in some of these gaps here. Nothing changes what you've seen before, and it's not about making all the connections. Like a Star Wars Episode 1 kind of, where everything's got to be everything you see has to mean something else in the future. But I think there's a way they could do it. I'm not saying I want it. I'm not saying I need it, because I definitely don't. But if it could happen, I could see a way where in that side spin-off stories, it could work and not part of the main story where it's all being like told in flashback, and that whole arc is all flashback. I could see it being a completely side, as if no one's recounting these stories, is that they're being told in real time, because if it were done in the quote unquote main book, it would be a flashback where someone would be retelling, here were the adventures of the Umbrella Academy, as opposed to just saying, here's what those stories would have been like if you read them and experienced them in real time. I could see a path on how that could work. But again, I'm not saying I want it or need it, because I definitely don't. But
yeah. All right. Well, that's all I have for Volume 1. So thank you for listening. Thank you for reading. Check out Volume 2, and we will see you back here next Thursday.
Peace.